I lived in an old shack-type house on 1/2 acre. It had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. The house was simple and small. The living room on the right, the kitchen, and a back door to the left. 2 bedrooms and the bathroom between them, and a door from the living room that went straight back into the 3rd bedroom. I filled that room with boxes of my things from storage, because there was no garage. I had quite a few friends from all walks of life. I wasn't working at the time, and they knew my door was always open just to say hi, stay for coffee, or play a few card games. It almost felt like my home was a hub for everyone to just leave your problems on the doorstep and relax for a moment. We even had a projector and would display movies some nights on the wall of this 2-story building next door if it was a fun time. Well, I never discriminate. If you are hungry or tired or needed a shower at my home, you're welcome. Be kind to me, I'll be kind to you, sort of thing. We even got raided a few times thinking we were selling drugs because of all of the activities going on, but they were sadly mistaken. One day a friend shows up, accompanied by this guy with very kind eyes, but he seemed very sad inside. He was hungry. I made him lunch. And he was a good conversationalist and we laughed for hours. My friend said that he didn't know the guy that well, but he seemed nice enough. He kept complimenting me, which of course made me feel uncomfortable, so I asked him to stop. He came back a few more times with his friends and once by himself. I didn't mind, I was never really alone with him. As time went on, he stopped coming over altogether, and I didn't think anything of this. People move on. After a while of living there, things started to feel strange in my home. Even when I was alone, I didn't feel like I was truly alone. Things started to feel off. Things were being moved. A few dishes were not where they were supposed to be in the cabinet. My bathroom mat was wet when I hadn't even showered, and I made sure every time I left things locked up. And I had the only key. My friends definitely thought I was losing it. It was close to Christmas, so we put a tree up, and everyone had a chance to put something on it when they came over. It was delightful, but soon after, the feelings of concern all flood back, when the candy canes started to disappear and the ornaments were rearranged daily. What was going on here? A few days later, we had a small get-together, just some close friends from out of town, and we all get a little bit tipsy. I told them they could sleep over. My friend Tom and his girlfriend in the other bedrooms, and his sister on the couch and in the living room. The next morning, I was first up. I went to make coffee and asked Tom's sister if she slept well. Not at all, that jerk. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She was alone in the room. Who could she be mad at? She said her brother Tom was snoring all night. Just then, Tom's girlfriend came out of the room saying, "What are you talking about? He doesn't snore, but I heard it too." I put my hands up and said, "My door was shut. I didn't hear anything." Later, we were eating breakfast, and Tom's sister asked him how he could eat so much with everything he ate while everyone was sleeping. We all looked at each other like she was crazy. "Sis, I didn't get out of bed last night." She argued that someone, a man, went to the kitchen and got food and then went back out, came back in and stood in front of the couch, sucking on a candy cane before going back to bed. He and his girlfriend insisted that it wasn't him. Okay, that was weird. Tom shared his concerns with me, being there alone, and to be honest, I was pretty freaked out at that point. Well, word got out that Tom was in town, so it wasn't before long that some friends came over to visit. They were only there for 30 minutes when Tom asked us all to go outside and check out something in his car. I was in the middle of something, but he put my arm in his hand and looked me straight in the eyes. "You have to see," while leading me to the door. Once we got outside, Tom turned to us and told us not to go inside, and 2 of his friends grabbed sticks and went back into my home with him. I heard yelling and a crash and ran to my door, but Tom's girlfriend stopped me. Soon after, they came out dragging a strange man with them. It was that guy with kind eyes. I didn't understand what was happening. Tom said he put 2 and 2 together with all the things I told him that were going on, and when he was standing by the bedroom door near the living room, he smelled urine. So he went around back and looked through the slats in the bedroom window and saw the man under my boxes hiding. He must have been eluding me for 2 weeks. The sheriffs were called, and they told Tom that they were looking for that guy for other crimes. To think the guy was just feet away from me, eating my food, watching me sleep, and God knows what he was doing when I wasn't home. What were his plans, and why was he there? After that day, I changed all the locks and got a dog. Thank you, Tom. I'm a female college freshman in my 2nd semester. This happened around the middle of my 1st semester, when I was unfamiliar with the area around my campus. My friends and I were working on projects after a long day of classes, and it was about 11 p.m. Amanda was really stressed about a project we had, since we were in the same class, and she began to cry. After calming her down, we all decided to grab some McDonald's and take a break, which wouldn't be too hard since our campus was in the middle of the city. The McDonald's that was closest to us was closed, but Brad saw on his phone that there was a 24-hour one a mere 20-minute walk away. Around 7 of us opted to go there, included Amanda and Brad. About 10 minutes into our walk, we realized that we were in an area we hadn't been in before. No problem, it didn't look bad, and there were 7 of us. There weren't too many strangers about as it was quite late. And when we walked, we made sure no one was alone. At one point though, I had walked a little bit ahead of everyone else and had turned around to wait for the others. To my left, I noticed a white car had suddenly pulled over to where I was. It wasn't like the person had known they were going to pull over. It was like out of the blue. Weird, I thought. The person in the white car never rolled down their window nor opened their door, but as my friends passed, it pulled away. Where the car had pulled over, we had to cross the street and began walking along next to the road after crossing. I glanced behind me and I saw the white car again, pulling up next to us. Then I realized that to get where we were going from, where the car had been before, they had to have made a U-turn, so it was obvious it was done intentionally. They roll down the window as we keep walking, and it's an older man, but due to the darkness, I never got a good look at his face. He neither said nor did anything, just stared. We just tell him to leave us alone. He was obviously staring at me. I began to get scared, anxiety rising in my chest. This guy was after me and was targeting me, and I had never been in a situation like this before. I was from a small town where walking after dark was a thing preteens could do without fear. After we pass, his car pulls away again and leaves. At this point, Amanda is walking behind everyone in a protective manner, and Brad is walking to my left so that I'm not near the road. A minute or two later, the white car returns after doing a further U-turn. At this point, he rolls down his window and begins to speak with me and shows me money, probably to try to get me to go into his car. That is what he obviously wanted. He kept gesturing me to get in, and I was just frozen. This guy could be armed. Who knew what he would be capable of? Most of my friends didn't really know what to say, just telling him to piss off, until Amanda, who had been walking behind me, begins to scream at him. Amanda had been raised in the area and obviously knew how to deal with people like this. She yelled at him, telling him to piss off, and that she would fight him if he stepped out the car. It wasn't her words that scared him off, but the attention she was bringing to the situation. He bolted after Amanda made a scene, and Brad gave me his sweatshirt to tie around my waist as I was wearing shorts and a crop top, which is probably what drew him to me in the first place. During this last encounter, when he was speeding off, Charlie grabbed a picture of this guy's plates. After that situation, we ended up in an even worse area, the kind of area with heroin needles littering the ground, but we didn't have the same kind of issues that we did before. Though I was still quite shaken up and scared of what had happened, I just wanted to go. We got to the McDonald's and found out they weren't even taking customers inside, only drive-through orders. So our goal basically fell flat, and we got harassment instead of chicken nuggets. We took 2 lifts back to our dorm, my group deciding to get cookies on the way back since the restaurant was a place we had known before and trusted. I haven't experienced anything like that or since, and haven't been in that area since, but I still feel a little bit of fear constrict me when I see a white car passing me a bit too slowly on the street, and when I'm in a city area I don't know well. So weirdo in the white car, let's not meet again. This story took place when I was 19. I was a year into my community college life, paying it off little by little, working a part-time job. But I hadn't had a boyfriend in a while. My mother, who was good friends with the woman who did our nails, would often talk about me to her. Soon enough, the nail lady had formed a solution by trying to hook me up with one of her other clients' sons. My mother humored me to this idea by saying that I might be able to get a free meal out of the deal, an appealing offer for a college student, and I saw no reason not to go along with it. I dolled myself up, because even though I wanted it to be a casual encounter, I still try to make myself appear nice to make my dates feel proud to be seen with me. I just take this as common courtesy for all dates, unless there was a prior agreement. It was nothing too fancy, a pair of nicely fitted jeans and a lacy cream-colored top, under a figure-flattening maroon hoodie with a flower print and some snow boots. It was late fall, and I live in a place that gets snow early. My makeup, though I don't usually wear a lot, flattered my face, and my hair was in neatly placed curls around my glasses. The date went well, and while he wasn't exactly the type of guy I would personally find attractive, he was really funny and a good guy. Despite that, we said our goodbyes to each other, and I headed my merry way back home, which was roughly 30 minutes away from the restaurant. While on my way home, I remembered that my headphones had broken earlier that day, as one side refused to work, which I found incredibly irritating. So I glanced at the clock and noticed it's just past 11:30 at night. Not too many places were open after 11, except for the Walmart that was on the other side of the road that just happened to lead to my house, approximately 20 minutes away and en route from the restaurant. I had been to this particular Walmart with my family a lot, due to it being the closest to my house. I live in a subdivision on the edge of a small town, surrounded by farmlands and other small towns. But this particular Walmart was situated just on the shoulder of an intersection that led right to the interstate, so it was easily accessible by both in-town folk and people just passing through. I pull into the parking lot and wedge my car between the other 2 cars at a spot that is fairly close to the front, yet also a little off to the side. Eager to get my errand over with, I pull out my purse, lock my car, and start making my way through the dark parking lot to the illuminated entrance at the front, passing through the handicap section that was mostly barren, save for one small red car. I noticed the driver, a 35-year-old looking large, bulky man with a red plaid shirt on and huge meaty fingers gripping the steering wheel in total silence. I noticed the car did not have a handicap sticker or mirror hang, but the driver was present, so I just assumed he was waiting for someone to come out and wanted a parking spot near the entrance so that he could come out. I thought no more of it, but decided to give him some space, so I gave the car a wide berth when trying to pass, and then I heard him call out to me. I look over to him, and he waved me over to his car, and after a brief pause to assess that he was in fact talking to me, as it was a pretty well-designed parking lot, but I didn't know the man, and had no idea why he would want to speak to me. I took a few tentative steps towards his car, but left at least 9 feet of space between us. With me being 5'5", I could judge that this man easily had a foot on me if not more, and I wanted the space to get behind a car should he decide he wanted to get out of his. I rotated the keys in my hand, so that the keyblade was poking out between my forefinger and thumb. "You sure are beautiful," he slowly begins saying. "Thanks," I say. I wasn't trying to be rude, but just eager to get inside. "Do you know which way the interstate is?" he asks me. And to me, this was the weirdest question he could have asked, because he was literally facing towards it. It was in his line of sight. He either had to have just come from it, or was a local, and neither would ask a question like that, because both would know the answer, and his eyes never left me. So with proverbial raised hackles, I answered him. "That road. There it is," and I gestured with my thumb. "Go out the parking lot and over the pass. Left side goes to capital city, right goes to the next state." "Thank you, miss," he says. He takes a moment to pause, eyeing the space I had so carefully set between us. "You sure are beautiful," he says again, even slower as I feel his eyes crawl across my silhouette, and I suppress a shudder as I see him bite his lip and move his hand lowly over the steering wheel. I should get going before the store closes. I interrupt him. I lie, I know. The store was open until 3 a.m, and any local would know that. But that seemed to shut his mouth. And I take that as my dismissal and turn on the balls of my feet, hastening my pace until I'm well illuminated and hear the automatic doors close behind me. I take more than necessary retrieving a cheap pair of earbuds from the electronics section and paying at self-service. Deciding that coming out the way I came in was the last thing I wanted to do, I made my way to the alternate exit on the other side of the store. Before going back out, I peeked my head from behind a wall to check if his car was still there, and it was. He's staring at the entrance where I had gone in, his engine still running, and his fat fingers drumming against the wheel. Thoroughly creeped, I thought about his question to me about the interstate, and just how close we were going across state lines, and just how late it was at night, and how rural this area was. I decided I most definitely didn't want to have another encounter with this man, so I zipped my hoodie up fully, so that nothing on me could reflect any light. I put my hood on and casually make my way towards the nearest row of cars, ducking slightly behind the nearest one. Not quick enough for the movement to catch his attention in the rearview mirror, but enough that I'm difficult to see if he did look up. I weave through the rows, down a ways away from him, and cross the road and back up towards my car. I make it and peel out the other way. The entire 20-minute ride home I check behind me every so often to make absolutely certain I see no headlights in my rear view. Eventually I make it home, lock all the doors, throw the headphones on my bed, and pass out under the covers. Creepy guy from Walmart, I don't know what your game was, but I'm sure glad I wasn't a part of it. Please, let's not meet again. This happened a while ago. To give you some context, I'm a male in my mid-20s, and at the time lived at home with my parents. We lived in a bigger than average house with a furnished basement apartment in a safe city in Canada. I lived in said basement apartment, while my parents lived on the top floor, the third story. Hearing noises and sounds from upstairs, mainly footsteps or doors opening and closing, is not unusual at all if you happen to live in the basement. When my younger siblings come home from college, these noises can be heard late into the night, at 2 or 3 a.m. even. My younger sibling would sometimes have a car with him, so you could hear the garage door open at odd hours as he would park his car inside. Needless to say, hearing noises while sleeping was never a cause for concern for me, and I had simply become used to it. But during the Christmas period a few years back, over the course of a few nights, I experienced strange occurrences that were downright mysterious, eerily creepy, and borderline paranormal. My parents had flown south to a Mexican resort to get away from the cold, and my younger brother decided to stay at his college town to party with his roommates. I was alone in the house for at least a week, until my parents returned, which wasn't really a problem for me. On the first night, I came home from a buddy's place at 11 p.m., watched a bit of TV, then decided it was time for bed. Before heading down to my room in the basement, I armed the security system, which, short of a security camera, was quite thorough. If anyone were to open any of the doors or windows of the house, a loud alarm would go off. The only way to disarm it is through an app. But if the alarm continued ringing for over a minute, the cops would be notified. I jumped into bed, and after a bit of Instagramming, I dozed off. A few hours later into my sleep, I was awoken by the loud sound of the garage door opening. Strange, I thought, because as I said before, no one was home or due home for a week. 30 seconds later, I heard another loud sound. This was of the garage door closing. At that moment, I thought nothing of it. Just maybe thought that my brother decided to drive home earlier than planned. Still, I tried to stay up and hear who it was that arrived home, or to see if the alarm would go off. After 30 more seconds of waiting, sleepy me decides that it's probably just my brother, who parked his car in the garage and is now taking his time to come inside, probably smoking a cigarette or something. I doze back to sleep, and nothing strange happens for the rest of the night. When I woke up, I went upstairs next morning, and there was no sign of my brother. No sign of any forced entry. The security system hadn't been triggered, and everything looked good. I even called my brother to see if he came home at all last night. He hadn't. Even the garage was empty, and didn't look like anything had been taken. I shrugged it off as me imagining things, sleep paralysis, or just a really vivid dream, and went to work for the day. The next night, I had the same routine as before. After work, I hung out with some friends, came home, armed the security system, and went to bed. I was sleeping peacefully, having even forgotten about the events of the previous night, when all of a sudden, I'm woken up by the loud sound of the garage door opening. I sat up in bed, trying to make sense of what the hell is going on, and then decide it was worth exploring. I grab my baseball bat and jacket and head upstairs. As I exit the main door, locking it behind me, and make my way to the garage, a sense of fear comes over me. The garage door is indeed open, and the light inside has been switched on. However, no one is in sight. I pinched myself, almost in disbelief, trying to make sure that I'm actually awake, then decide to walk around the house just to make sure everything is alright. It's 2:30 a.m. at this point, and the neighborhood is eerily quiet. My footsteps in the snow seem to be quite loud, but oddly enough, the neighbor's dog, who just about barks at anything that moves, has been quiet this whole time. As I proceeded to the backyard, the motion light turns on, and what I see next moves me to my very core. Footsteps in the snow. And they look fresh. The trail suggests someone must have hopped the fence and gone window to window to take a peek inside. Although disturbing, that seemed logical enough of a conclusion. Though how exactly this person got into my garage, I'm still not sure. At this point, I decided to call the cops. The cops showed up after about 30 minutes and walked around the place trying to find clues. Besides the footsteps, nothing worthwhile was found. However, one of the cops flashed his light over the fence into the neighbor's backyard, from where I thought the footsteps came into mine, but found no footsteps at all. I found that extremely worrying, but the cops seemed to explain it away by saying someone probably traversed the fence and landed straight into my yard. I wasn't buying it, but seeing as though nothing had been stolen or damaged, there was little the cops could do at this point. After they left, I went back inside my house, then stayed awake a while longer to see if anything else transpired. Luckily, the rest of the night went incident-free, and I ended up passing out on the living room couch shortly after. On the third night, after work, I came straight home, cooked myself a quick dinner, and then went to bed, or at least tried to sleep. That was around midnight, but what happened the previous 2 nights kept me up for a while. Finally, after staying up waiting to see if something had happened, I passed out at 2 a.m. This time the sound that awoke me was not the garage door opening, but the sound of the alarm. Maybe it was because I was on high alert, or just that I never was fully asleep. But the minute the alarm started ringing, I was on my feet, baseball bat in hand, prepared for an altercation. I had decided I'd let the alarm ring out without disturbing it, thinking the cops would come rushing to my aid. The alarm kept ringing for what seemed like an eternity. It had probably only been a couple of minutes in reality, and my heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it. That's when it occurred to me. I hadn't heard any sound coming from upstairs, no footsteps, no door opening or closing, no noise of a forced entry through a window or something like that. I mustered up all the bravery I could and ventured out of the basement onto the ground floor of the house. After switching on all the lights that were in my way, I called out to see if I could get a response from someone that was there, if there was actually someone at all. There was no indication that anything had happened though, and after turning off the alarm, I did a quick check of the doors and windows in the rest of the house. By this point, I was too scared to venture outside like previous nights, and only did so once the cops showed up 30 minutes later. It was the same officers. We did a quick check around the house to see if there was anything suspicious, and once again found footprints in the snow. But these were at a different place. These footsteps came across the front driveway and made their way to the side of the house, only stopping at a lower window that looks into the basement. I looked directly into my bedroom. By this point, I'm terrified, and once the cops leave, I decide to drive to a nearby hotel for the rest of the night. Once there, I contemplated calling my parents, but didn't want to stress them out during their much-needed vacation, and didn't want to seem like I was scared in front of my brother, who'll probably just make fun of me anyway. I decided I'd go back home, and the next day replace the batteries on all security system sensors, as I had managed to convince myself that was the problem. But it obviously doesn't explain the garage door opening randomly the 2 previous nights. The next night, I came home from work early, replaced the batteries of the sensors like I said I would, armed the security system and went to bed. This time, it was in my parents' room, which was on the top floor. I did not want to have some creep watching me while I slept, though I ended up not doing any sleeping at all at night. In any case, I had just brought my baseball bat up with me in case. Around 2:30 a.m. that night, while watching some Netflix, I hear the alarm go off once more. This was out of the blue, with no sounds or noises of forced entry or broken windows. I jump to my feet, pick up the baseball bat and start walking to the door, fully intending to leave the room and see what the hell was actually happening. But just as I got to the door, something inside told me that was a bad idea. I ended up locking the door instead. Mind you, the alarm is still going off, and I wasn't waiting 30 minutes again for the cops to show, and decided to dial 911 myself, using my cell phone. Still, there are no footsteps or any sounds of movement. I walk to the window to see if anyone's out here, but there's nothing. Just as the 911 operator picks up and begins asking me what my emergency is, I hear the sound of the doorknob rustling. Someone was trying to enter my room, but this was no ordinary rustling either. It was fast, relentless, and violent, almost as if the person trying to turn it were doing so at 100 miles an hour. I began yelling into my phone, "Someone is in my house trying to kill me." The operator tried asking me for more information, but I was in such a daze I just yelled out my address and told them to send the police right away. I threw the phone on my bed, grabbed my bat, gripping it as tightly as I could, waiting for whoever or whatever it was to finally break through and come and get to me. But just a few seconds later, the rustling stops. The alarm is still ringing, but I hear no sounds of footsteps nor movement, which at this point is making my imagination run wild, thinking of ghosts or other paranormal stuff. I was still standing there, bat in hand, waiting for some sort of dramatic entrance, but it never came. Instead, I heard the siren of 2 police cars make their way down the street and into my driveway, and at this point, I decided I'd rather jump out the window onto the garage than onto the driveway to be with the cops than stay another minute in the house alone. It didn't matter that it was freezing outside or if I wasn't wearing my jacket. I just wanted to leave. Once I broke the window and got on top of the garage, I managed to get the attention of the cops, who helped me down and then asked if that person was still inside. I was on the verge of tears by this point. I could only manage a nod. 3 of the officers went to check out the rest of the house, while 1 stayed with me. About 5 minutes later they returned, saying there were no signs of forced entry anywhere. I'm freaking out at this point, trying to figure out what the deal is with the doorknob upstairs. They then went inside the house to see or find any clues, and surprisingly, or not, found nothing. By this point, one of my neighbors, who's always been pretty helpful, noticed the commotion and decides to see what's happening. He must have noticed I wasn't wearing a jacket and brought me one. Meanwhile, the cops decide there's nothing more they can do and ask me to check with the security company about inspecting the system that's been installed, in case it was faulty. As for the doorknob, they seemed understandably skeptic, but seeing the state I was in at that point, decided not to probe me too much. The same officer offered me to let me crash on his couch for the night, as well as some extra food, and I was glad to not be sleeping in that house. The next morning over breakfast, my neighbor calls and tells me he has a security camera installed outside of his house, which actually captures a bit of my driveway, and asks if I'd want to watch it to get some closure. I say yes. So he pulls out his laptop and begins playing the video from the night before. What we saw scared the jeepers out of both of us, and I think his skepticism completely melted away. We saw that at around 2:15 a.m., a bald man wearing nothing but dark-colored clothes walks up the street and stops right in front of my driveway facing the house. He doesn't continue walking, so technically he was never on my property, but he was there nonetheless, just staring without any movement whatsoever, hands by his side. At 2:20, he starts rocking back and forth, still with his feet planted in the same spot, and he continues doing this for 10 minutes until 2:30, which is exactly when my alarm went off. He then turns around and walks back in the direction he came in, walking out of view. I was completely shaken upon seeing that footage. It was so unreal, and although I didn't believe in the paranormal or ghosts, that bit had me questioning everything I thought I knew. We checked the tapes from the previous 3 nights, and what I found was truly disturbing. The same person, bald, wearing dark clothes, walked up the street around 2:15, stopped in front of my driveway, and went through his usual routine. The second and third night this took place, I had come outside with a bat to investigate, but he would promptly leave at 2:30, basically minutes before I or the cops had a chance to see him. But what was truly strange was that in the video at least, he never once came to my backyard or even to the side of my house towards my basement window. He just stood at the foot of my driveway staring and swaying at the house, then left. I handed the recordings over to the cops, but unsurprisingly he was never caught or found. I called my brother that day and asked him to come and stay with me until our parents arrived. Thankfully nothing happened after that night, but it did leave some lasting mental scars, as I slept with all the lights on in my room for a year after that, and now I need a light to sleep, as well as leaving me with tons of questions. Who the hell was that? How did he/it know I was sleeping there that night? What was his deal with the alarm going off and the garage door opening out the blue? For the record, we had someone come and check up on the system, and it was supposedly working fine. And it did work fine after that night. And what of the snow prints? How the hell did that doorknob hold for as long as it did? Did the thing on the other side intend on coming in at all? What would have happened if it did? My sister and I needed to go to Walmart to pick our mum up some groceries. We were in the freezer aisle when I looked up and noticed a man staring at me. Me being me, I said, "That man must think I'm cute because he won't stop staring at me." We didn't think much else of it. We continued our shopping when I noticed him staring at me again, this time in a different aisle. I was starting to get creeped out. I told my sister maybe we should try going into a completely different part of the store. We went into women's clothing and he followed. Electronics, he followed. Realizing how scary this was, we decided to hurry up and check out and leave. We were relieved when we didn't see him as we were checking out. We were heading for the doors and the coast looked clear. I turned my head as we were right about to exit the store, and there he was. He came out of the bathroom right in front of where the checkout was. I knew he saw me, so we hurried to go to the car and put the groceries away. Of course, his vehicle was parked only a few spots away from ours. We eventually decided to leave, and when we did, he began backing out as well. He was very obviously following us. We parked in a different spot. Sure enough, so did he. I told my sister we should cut through one of the parking lots to get to the main road a different way. Luckily, this man got stuck behind a line of traffic waiting to leave Walmart as we were hurrying away. I'm not sure what his true intentions were, but I was later told how popular sex trafficking is in that area. I don't want to find out, so let's never meet again, Walmart creep. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was a naive 22-year-old. I had been downtown drinking at a bar, catching up with old friends from high school, when the pub closed for the night, and we went back to a friend's apartment. We had a few drinks, and before we knew it, it was 4 a.m. She offered me a place on the couch, but I had to waitress at 4 the next day, so I wanted to be home and do some errands before work. I thought I grabbed a $20 bill for a cab fare in case, but it turns out I only grabbed a $5, so opted for the bus. She lived about a 15 to 20 minute walk from the closest bus stop that I needed, so I left her place and began making my way. I was well aware of the dangers of this choice, but being a very young, naive girl, I assumed it would turn out okay, since I had been in similar situations before. I called my boyfriend at the time, and that possibly could have been a decision that saved my life that night. As I'm walking over this detour bridge downtown, I was telling my boyfriend, "It's going really well. I haven't seen a single person since I started walking." Shortly after I said that, I hear footsteps running. I look up to the part of the bridge that I was walking on and paused. Mid-run, directly in front of me, was this guy staring right into my eyes. He was panting slightly from the running. He didn't look like he was drunk, but his eyes were so wide, and I'll never forget that image for the rest of my life. I kept walking, trying to keep as calm as possible. I loudly say to my boyfriend what had just happened, and describe his physical appearance as best I can, and as loudly as I could, and told him my location. I also said, "If I stop talking to you for even 30 seconds, call the police and tell them everything I just told you." I decided to look back to see if he was following me, and sure enough, off to the side of the path I was on under a street light, he was there. A completely black silhouette that was this guy, standing stiff as a board facing me. I thought my heart was already racing, but that sight nearly gave me a heart attack. I walked faster, and after a minute I looked back over my shoulder, and he was in the exact same pose, just closer now, and under a different light post. At this point I had two options: continue on the path I was on, or make a run for it under this underpass that was extremely well lit. So I ran. I've been playing soccer and track all through high school, so I had some advantage. As I was in the underpass, I heard him sprint. I remember thinking, if you look back now, it could slow you down, but at least you'd know if he's following you or not. So I looked. I looked in time to witness him sprint past the lit area I was in. No time to rest, because I assumed he was looking to head me off somewhere, so I kept running until I reached a very busy and populated bus stop. As I was resting, from 3 to 4 blocks away, I saw him walking and look around everywhere, I assume looking for me. I got home and immediately called the cops, and one finally showed up to my apartment at 8 a.m. He took a statement, but there wasn't much they could do other than watch the area and keep his physical description in their database. The scariest part when I look back, over the whole course of the ordeal, I never saw him move until I made a run for it. It was like he was some kind of mannequin. So creepy late night stalker, let's not meet again. I just got home from a reasonably big night out. It's 4:30 a.m. and stinking hot in this part of Australia. I walked in the door, opened the fridge, and was so happy to find 3 icy cold beers. I take 2 of them, walk upstairs to bed, and read and drink myself into a boozy sleep. The first issue. The beers are not twisty tops. They need a bottle opener, and after some sloppy drunken attempts using the handle of a drawer by my bedside table, I head back downstairs to get an actual bottle opener. I turn on the kitchen lights, which are so bright they make the space behind my eyes burn. I squint around to find the bottle opener, which I can't find, so I use the solid edge of a large kitchen knife. It's a risky choice, but the bottle cap is now off the beer, and I'm happy. I turn off the alien blinding kitchen light and head upstairs, but something through the front of my house that looks onto the street catches my eye. I stop at the bottom stair, and all the hairs on the back of my neck and arms stand. I turn my head slowly, and my eyes and brain are trying to make sense of what I'm looking at. It looks like a rain-drenched woman in a fancy white dress gazing at me through the window. Wait, it actually is. I pause and take the longest inhale of my life. She's glaring at me like she hates me. She has mascara running down her face, and she is drenched from the rain. Her arms are extended like she's leaning her head towards me. Her body language was trying to say, "Look at me. Look of what you've done." I'm crapping myself, but the rational side of my brain kicks in and I think, oh crap, does she need help? I slowly walk over to the window, her gaze still locked onto mine. We are now literally within a meter of each other, and I state loudly through the glass, "Are you okay? Do you need help? Is anyone with you?" Then it dawns on me my gate is locked, and there is an 8-foot-high fence which is very difficult to climb. How did she get in? She doesn't respond to my inquiry. She just keeps that hateful look in her eyes. We stood there looking at each other for another 30 seconds. I was looking around nervously, trying to make sense of this, and she was just glaring into my soul. And then she finally opened her mouth, as if to say something, but it wasn't words that came out of her. It was an insanely high-pitched meow. And then she started clawing at the window with her novelty-sized fingernails. What? I'm frozen. I don't know what to do. She clearly isn't well, not very well at all. Then in the background behind the fence, I see another woman of 20-something years, dressed in a short black club dress with the glow of her phone lighting up her face. She sees the woman in white at my window and yells, "Michelle, that's the wrong house." The rain-soaked, nightmarish Catwoman's eyes go from "I hate you, I want you to die" to "Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed." And she runs over to the fence and impressively Army Commando flings herself over it. I can then hear a group of ladies pissing themselves laughing, saying how Jason's house is number 25, not 23. That poor guy is probably gonna call the cops now. All that I know is that I'm so happy that I was on the receiving end of that misdirected prank, and I don't have to be killed by a well-dressed hybrid cat demon woman. And now I have to go back down to the kitchen to open my other beer, but I'm still too afraid. This happened around 3 years ago. My youngest was 3 months old, nearly 4 months. Now, there are 2 Walmarts near me, and both roughly a 15-minute drive. One is in a sketchy area, and the other in a nicer one. I needed to pick up a new pump since I was breastfeeding and had just gone back to work. I was in the children's area with my Lou in his car seat covered by a blanket as he had been sleeping. There was this old lady looking at baby stuff, and she asked me about my baby. I answered politely but short, and she proceeded to tell me about her grandbabies and how her whore of a daughter-in-law kept them away from her. By this point, Lo wakes up and lifts his blanket, and I start to walk away and talk to him. I go and look at baby clothes, and this lady is right behind me just staring at me. I felt like something was wrong, so I left the baby section and went to the electronics, trying to get away from her. I didn't see her behind me, and then I just think how silly I am. I've watched way too many serial killer documentaries, and I just chuckled to myself. I remember I forgot to get bags to store my milk in, and then decide to return to the baby section. It was just me and Lo in the aisle, and I bent down to look at the section of storage bags when something just felt off. There's this old lady again, sneakily trying to unbuckle my son. I told her to get the hell away from him, and she then proceeds to try and take the whole baby carrier with my baby in it. She was yelling about how it was her right as a grandmother to get her grandchild, and how this was her baby. By this point, I'm yelling like a madwoman, and here come two employees that separate us but left my child in the middle. I'm trying to get to my son as they're trying to figure out what's going on. The old lady starts telling them that I was trying to kidnap her baby. I'm in tears, and I tell them it's my baby, and show them pictures of my son and I along with the rest of my family that were on my phone. I asked to be escorted to my car, and they did that while they made the woman wait for me to be gone. She was yelling some crazy stuff at me, and I ended up sending someone else to go buy what I needed at Target, and I haven't stepped into that Walmart again since. I was at a graduation party when I was 18 that lasted late but not too late. I drove home, and I live in a small area that's not uncommon for all the parking spots to be full and everyone to be asleep in my street that late. I was the only car I saw on my way home. When I pulled up, I parked in front of our driveway as if I were blocking it, and saw ahead at the intersection at the end of the block. There was a car stopped at the stop sign, facing my block, idling. I knew a girl I went to school with who lived in the house next to where the car was stopped, so figured they were just waiting at the stop sign for her, as there were no parking spots free. I'm also a super cautious person, and always think people are following me. So I was going to wait in my car until the car left, but I noticed my phone had died on the way home. It was my first cell phone, and car chargers weren't huge in my family until this. Usually I'd call my brother, who was a year younger than me, to come out and walk with me inside, but I couldn't do that. I waited for 10 minutes, and the car didn't move. It was switched on, the lights were on, and I was freaking out. I finally got the nerve to just get out the car and run. My house was right there, and I positioned my keys so that I could just unlock the door as quickly as possible. As soon as my door opened, I took a step out the car, and my car light went out when the car across the intersection floored it. I heard the tires squeak and everything. The car was clearly waiting for me to make a move. I saw it pull up and waited till I got out. I don't even know how it happened, but I managed to pull myself back into the car, turn on the car, and reverse out the spot that I had parallel parked in, and pull out just as the back passenger window of this car met my window. Everything was tinted. I missed the driver window trying to leave, so I didn't see anything of who it could have been. Once I was driving again, I was sobbing. My phone was out of charge, and I didn't know what to do. I considered going back to the party, but eventually I just circled my blocks enough times that I was able to connect every car in the area with my neighbors, so I felt comfortable enough to go back home. I'd never run out of my house so quickly in my life. My mom worked nights as a nurse, so I didn't bother waking my brother or stepdad up. I charged my phone, called my mum sobbing, and she was so upset, she screamed at my stepdad, whose car I was driving, for not having a car charger. Which was not the problem, but I see Mama Bear trying to control whatever she could. To this day, 7 years later, if I'm driving at night, I tell my mum when I'm home. It's such a safe town, and I've never heard of anything like this happening since. When I was a young kid, we had a favorite drive-in theater we liked going to during the summer that was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It was sort of a family tradition to pick out a movie that we weren't entirely sure we wanted to see, wait until it was one of the 2 movies being shown at the drive-in, and pack our SUV with blankets, lawn chairs, and any family friends willing to come with us. Since the theater allowed you to bring in outside food, if you paid $10 in addition to the original charge for the entire car, we would hit a grocery store, usually Walmart, and pick up some goodies as well as any non-perishable items we needed for the week. We would usually split up into groups so that we could easily get to the drive-in early enough to pick out the good parking spots. Since I was around 9 or 10 at the time, I was considered old enough to go into a nearby aisle to pick up a few items as long as my parents were nearby. At this point, my mum was on the other side of the Walmart with my little brother, and I was teamed up with my dad, who sent me to pick up some peanut butter and some jelly. I, being about 9 years old and eager to prove to them that I can be trusted to do things by myself, run off to the jelly aisle, where I am about to grab the requested items when I notice a very, very creepy looking man in the aisle standing right in front of the jelly. He was an older man in farmer garb, including the overalls and the trucker hat, but what really scared me was his mouth. Now I know that he had probably been an avid chewing tobacco fan when he was younger, which probably led to some form of mouth cancer, which probably led to his jaw being removed due to said cancer. But to the naive and scared 9-year-old, I thought I was seeing a zombie. I'm sure if it had healed correctly, it would have made less of an impression on 9-year-old me, but the fact that it hadn't, as well as a look in his eyes, and the posture he had made me nervous. I was waffling between trying to grab the jelly real quick or cut my losses and tell my dad I couldn't find it, when the man turned and smiled. I, of course, proceeded to nope out the aisle where my dad was and tell him I couldn't grab it. So my dad sort of rolled his eyes and walked me back to the aisle, which is where the man was still standing and smiling, and staring in the direction I had ran out the aisle from. My dad proceeded to usher me to the other side of the store to find something else. At this point I thought I was being silly, and started to think the guy was really just a harmless old man with some sort of disease trying to get his groceries, when my dad told my mum not to go to the jelly aisle and that we were leaving. I'm not entirely sure if the guy was just a harmless old man recovering from mouth cancer, or a dangerous person. I felt a little guilty that I'd judged him based solely on looks, but I would prefer if we did not meet again. 2 years ago, I was in my living room playing Call of Duty at about 1 a.m. when I heard 3 very loud gunshots. I played with the volume very low as my wife and kids were sleeping, so I immediately knew some stuff was going down. It had sounded like it came from my backyard, so I didn't know what to do. Then I heard someone jump my fence into my backyard, and I see a shadow walking slowly by my kitchen window. The lights were off in the kitchen, so they couldn't see me. I paused and couldn't move or breathe. Next thing I knew, he stops, then sprinted towards my front yard and out our front gate. I only lived 2 blocks from the police station, and the next thing I know, the cops started surrounding my house. I opened my door and tell them what happened, and immediately there was a helicopter searchlight on me. There were several cops in my backyard and in my front yard. I told them what happened, but they wouldn't tell me anything. What had happened, which I found out through the news, was that the guy had left the local bar with some younger kids to go to the liquor store behind my house. One thing had led to another, and they all started fighting. Some man driving by saw the whole thing, got out of his car to break it up, and the guy that was fighting the younger kids ended up stabbing one in the head and then shot the passerby 3 times in the chest, obviously killing him. This all happened directly behind my house. The kid survived and the shooter got away. They found out that the guy who got killed was driving home to Colorado and just stopped in our town trying to find a hotel for the night. I am a woman who grew up under the impression that I was ugly. I always walked with my head down and my eyes down. I know this seems like something stupid to start with, but bear with me. I've always been fascinated by the samurai era in Japan, so I have always collected memorabilia from the era. I was setting groceries with my little girl who was about 13 months old at the time. This guy had been following me through the store. He was wearing a brown rain jacket up with a hood. Not acting unusual, it was raining buckets. As anyone who's ever walked through a Walmart and paid attention, you've noticed there is a natural flow to the aisles. I'm just getting milk, bread, and a couple of other things, and I went against the flow. This guy in the brown raincoat follows us through the store. He had a strong body odor, foul, as if he had foregone bathing since puberty, some odd 40 years ago. He didn't have a cart and only followed us closely. I finished my shopping, noting that the guy followed us and had picked up a few random things. I checked myself out and hurried out the door into the sprinkling darkness. As I was placing my little one in her seat, I hear a foot behind the wheel of the cart, putting it between myself at the end of my car. As I was parked to the left of a cart track, it was what the back end of the car is pressed against, leaving maybe an inch of room between the car and cart. The now familiar stench overwhelmed me, and I heard a low, coughing laughter. I had begun prepping to put the milk in the floorboard, which is after my earlier shopping memorabilia collecting included moving a rather large, closely wrapped katana umbrella. Instinct demanded that instead of simply moving the umbrella, I take it out, swing automatically for the fences, and I missed. The man had grabbed my cart and was standing opposite me with that low, insane laughter. I snarled, shoved the cart at him, then made as if to withdraw the blade from the umbrella katana's umbrella part. As a survivor of previous attacks, I had taken to training at a local dojo. I looked him straight into his buggy eyes and told him to get lost. His eyes went to my hands, and for the longest second his mouth stood open. The second my hand let go, I went off, and the man ran away with the mark of my umbrella across his face, slamming into the Walmart asset protection associate who I knew from high school. As they loaded him into the police car almost 20 minutes later, he just kept staring at me, his mouth moving, with no words coming out. I hope we never meet again. My family lives in a small town in central Minnesota, and things like this hardly ever happen here. It was a startling surprise. Anyway, last night my mother and my grandma decided to go shopping at a Target in a nearby town for groceries and a couple of other things for my grandmother's house. They pulled into the parking lot, entered the store and began shopping. Pretty normal night shopping so far. My grandma and mum usually shop separately, so they grabbed carts and went off in their own directions. This is when things got a little weird. My mum and grandma both noticed this rather strange man wearing a tan t-shirt and bland jeans, aimlessly walking the empty aisles of Target, seemingly with no objective. My mum had noticed him a few times at that point, always in the same aisle as her, and each time he had been throwing small glances at her, trying really hard to be inconspicuous, but failing. He would just stand there, throw glances at her, whilst pretending to browse the shelves. My mum was starting to get a little creeped out at this point, but tried to brush it off. Mum moved on to another aisle to look for Gatorade cases, and happened to lose him for a bit. My mother, now feeling a little better because the man was nowhere to be found, picked up some Gatorade, threw it in the cart, and glanced at her list once more. Just as she was about to move on to the chips aisle, she received an ominous call from my grandma. Evidently, after my mum left the aisle the man was in, my grandma noticed the same man speed walking down the center aisle of the grocery section, looking down each aisle for my mum, turning his head wildly in every direction. My grandma told her to be careful, and my mum agreed and hung up to hurry up and finish her shopping. As they were finishing up, my mum went over to the cards shelf and looked at a few things. As she was doing this, the man seemed to appear out of nowhere, and my mum nearly plowed him over with her cart. She quickly apologized, but as soon as she saw his face, she made a beeline for the checkout 50 meters away where my grandma was waiting. My mum and grandma checked out together, hearts pounding as the man walked up right behind them in the checkout line, a little too close for comfort. The man was apparently hunched over, his head concealed as he was facing away from them, taking notes or something with a small notepad, while looking at every one of them once in a while. My mum began to feel sick from fear at this point, and as soon as they paid, they took off quickly out the door to my mum's large SUV. The man was buying 2 small glass cups, giving them time to run off as he checked out himself. Unfortunately, my mum and grandma had only just begun to unload their groceries into the SUV when he came out staring them down. He strode over to his white Ford Escape, which was parked just across the lot from my mum, and got into it, holding his shopping bag with the 2 cups. Now my mum and grandma were frantic. They basically threw the remainder of the groceries into the back of the SUV and took off, trying to lose the man. Sure enough, he followed. My mum was still not completely sure what to do, and drove off the normal route to the highway, where she decided to try something. At the junction to the highway that leads to our hometown, instead of continuing straight on the current road, my mum abruptly slammed on the brakes and turned right onto the highway towards our town, pedal to the metal. Mum regrets doing this because the man from Target did the exact same thing. The distance my mum put between her and the man was quickly closed when he caught up to her, tailgating her SUV incredibly closely. At this point, my mum was freaking out, her knees shaking. They were only 5 miles from home at that point, and were out in the middle of nowhere, not knowing what to do. She continued accelerating up to 90 miles per hour to try and put more distance between them, and sure enough, he did the same and caught up again. After what seemed like a whole day, they finally reached town. At the first stoplight, my mother slammed on her brakes and took a hard right onto the first road in town. The man, not expecting this, continued on. My mum, thinking this was all over, pulled into the McDonald's just off the road and took a few breaths before going back on the road. She turned onto a frontage road and headed towards our home, now only 1 mile away, but nearly had a heart attack when she noticed a pair of headlights belonging to an ever-familiar white Ford Escape turning onto the same frontage road from the next street up. The man must have turned right at the next lane. My mum told me herself. It was like time suddenly slowed down as they passed each other. Upon seeing my mum's SUV, the man slammed on his brakes in the middle of the road and made an illegal U-turn to get back on her tail, and my mum was nearly crying. She made another abrupt right turn without signaling on the road that the police station was located on, hoping to lose him. She pulled into the brightly lit police station parking lot and just sat there for a while. The man must have noticed the building she was parked in front of, because he just continued on and parked in the parking lot of an adjacent apartment building and sat there watching her to see her next move. Regretfully, my mum didn't call 911 at this point, mainly because she was frozen with fear. My mum and grandma probably stayed parked at the police station for at least half hour, until the man left and drove off. They didn't leave the police station for at least 15 minutes after that. They never saw the white escape after this. My mum dropped my grandma off at her house and then drove back home to ours and got no sleep that night. The next morning, my mum called the police and filed a report. They took his description along with his car and said that they would get back to her. Fast forward to Sunday morning. My mum received a call while enjoying Mother's Day drinks with Grandma at our house. It was the sheriff. And apparently he had some news on this stalker. Apparently, he lived in a town 45 minutes southeast of ours in an apartment. He is the real kicker. The apartment hadn't been occupied for at least 3 months. We really don't know where to go from here. The man could literally be anywhere, and that has been freaking the whole family out. We don't know if he somehow found out our address, and the sheriff just told my mum that they would keep watch on our neighborhood for the next few days and told her to call 911 immediately if she sees anything out of place. This event really shook my mum and grandma up, and my dad has been in a near shaking rage over the last 2 days because of it. I just hope we never have to meet that crazed guy. I am a 22-year-old male. I'm a little stocky and muscular, but not fat. Not someone you would try to actively avoid in a dark alley, but also not someone you would really want to pick on for being puny. I'm your average guy. I was with my girlfriend. It was around 10 p.m. and it was dark out. We left a friend's house to meet some other friends at an Applebee's 20 minutes away. We pull out the driveway and are on our way. 3 minutes down the road, I noticed a very large truck approaching us very closely. It swerved a little bit, but the driver didn't seem drunk. The speed limit was 45 miles an hour and was going a solid 50 miles an hour, as it was a fairly straight road and not many cars were on it. The driver then started flashing his lights. This is normally a pretty universal sign that either my lights are off or he wants me to pull over, or I'm not driving adequately. I recently had my car inspected and passed, so it wasn't the lights. I was driving just over the speed limit, and there was no way that I was pulling over. Plus, it was a passing area, so he could have passed if he wanted to, and I kept driving. He was literally right behind me, not 15 or 20 feet, but right behind me, and there were no other cars around, so I decided to start taking side roads. I knew the area pretty well, so I was confident. Meanwhile, my girlfriend just really wanted Applebee's. Classic girlfriend. So I took some random side road, and of course he followed right behind me, still flashing his lights, and I kept turning into other roads, trying to lose him, but he was staying right on my tail. Finally, my girlfriend realized how weird this was and began getting a little nervous. I was nervous too, and our area has a high crime rate, and some gang initiations involve running people off the road, forcing people to pull over, and shooting them, and other car-related mumbo-jumbo. So we were both scared that this could be the case, and I kept taking side roads, as he kept staying right behind me. Finally, we arrive at Walmart. This Walmart has a back road where the trucks go to unload. I took the turn on the road without even using my blinker, still trying to lose him, and I ended up driving at 80 miles an hour on the small back road, but he literally did not stop. The small road wraps around to the main parking lot, and I skipped all stop signs and ignored all safety rules of the road. Thanks to the fluorescent Walmart lights, I was able to see that the truck was red and beaten down. I could see the Applebee's in the distance, so I decided that I would park and just deal with this like a man. At this point, my girlfriend was actually tearing up. This whole ordeal may not sound that scary, but trust me, it was. Once I pulled into the Applebee's parking lot, I noticed the red truck was no longer following us. He just disappeared. I looked at my girlfriend to try and comfort her, and when I looked up, he was gone. This was honestly terrifying. I pulled up to the Applebee's to meet my friends inside, and they could tell that we were visibly shaken up. We were so shaken we didn't even get any food to eat, even though we were super hungry. I managed to glance out the window and saw the same red truck parked 3 or 4 rows behind our car, just sitting there with the lights on. I'd had enough. I grabbed a steak knife from the table and went outside to find out what was going on. When I reached the truck, no one was inside. The back seat was full of duct tape, random tools, tarp, and other everyday items that seemed especially creepy at the time. I took pictures of the license plate and waited around for the owner to return, but he didn't. There's no doubt he saw me waiting by his truck, sweatshirt hood up, looking like a weirdo. I called the police to let them know what was happening. I was told to be very careful, as gang initiations were starting to pick up in our area. The truck was the same one that followed me around, and yes, it could have just been some teens trying to be funny, but don't mess with me or my girlfriend, or Applebee's. So Mr. Truck Driver who ruins appetites and may want to kill me, please, let's never meet again. I was home alone one evening and had gone to sleep for the night. I live with my significant other and 2 indoor cats, but she was out of state, traveling for business. I woke up in the middle of the night. I wasn't sure of the time, but it was completely dark because my body was freezing cold. I actually like it cool when I sleep, and usually have the temperature around 70 degrees or colder since I live in central Texas. But this was different. I was ice cold, but wrapped in blankets. It was the middle of summer and things aren't cold. When I grabbed my phone to look at the time, it seemed to be off, and when I pressed the on button it didn't respond. As I was half asleep, I shrugged this off. I walked out of my bedroom to go adjust the thermostat, and noticed that the cats weren't around. This was weird. These furballs are always hanging out in the bed, or around the bed. I walked to the thermostat, tried to adjust it, but the power to the thermostat was nil, and the power to the house seemed to be off. I peeked out the upstairs window to see if any of my neighbors were having power issues. I noticed that all of their outdoor lights were working just fine. From the time I woke to this moment, had about 2 minutes between them. I decide to wander downstairs and grab some water, but am startled when I realize there is a glow of light coming from the first floor. The way my house is situated, I couldn't see the light until I had approached the stairs. I found this odd because the power seemed to be out just upstairs, which didn't make a lot of sense. When I started walking down the stairs, I began to hear a faint humming noise. The noise had a high pitch to it, with arbitrary pulses of low sound, almost like a muffled weed whacker that someone is throttling at random. As I continue to walk down the stairs, I spot a dark, slowly moving figure in the room, with light at the bottom of the stairs. The next step that I take feels like I walked off the side of a cliff or was sucked into the floor. That is the best way I can explain it, because I don't remember what happened after that moment. I just lost all feeling in my body. My next memory is waking up again to the sound of my phone's alarm. Everything seemed to be back to normal. I sat there in bed, cats being too lazy in bed next to me, and tried to think about the last 2-minute incident that happened in the middle of the night. I'm not a sleepwalker, and I definitely wasn't dreaming. My security systems app shows the time whenever the door is opened or closed, and I realized that my security system was disarmed on the app, and that the front door had been opened and closed several times through the night. I pulled up my security footage from the exterior cameras and was surprised to learn there was zero footage from the night. Like the motion sensors reacted to a random car driving by at 10 p.m. and then the next thing is another random car in the morning. So someone or something walked in and out of my front door and the cameras captured no footage. My neighbor across the street has a good security system that points at my house. So I asked if I could review the footage from his cameras and told him some made-up story about how I thought someone had broken into my truck. He said it was weird because when he pulled up the footage from that night, his cameras didn't record anything, just a time gap once again. My first thought was that I was sleepwalking and that my memory was a dream, but it just couldn't have been. When I looked out the window in the middle of the night, I distinctly recall a red pickup truck parked in the wrong direction in front of the neighbor's house. I always notice when cars are parked left wheel to the curb, because I've gotten a ticket for it in the past. The truck was not there before I went to sleep based on footage, but was there in the morning. So the truck was there when I saw it in the middle of the night. And I definitely woke up in the middle of the night, cold as ice. No cats, no working phone or thermostat. I saw the truck out the window and then got warped by something on the stairs. A couple of additional things were different in the house. The security system was disarmed and I definitely armed it before going to bed. The light was still on downstairs and that was absolutely off when I went up. My whole body smelled like burnt marshmallows. I know this is weird, but it really is how it smelled. And lastly, my 55-gallon fish tank that sits at the bottom of the stairs in the entryway was missing 2/3 of its water. Like seriously, where did 40 gallons of water go? The whole area around the tank was bone dry and the fish were fine. I think I was screwed over by some thirsty aliens. This happened 4 years ago last summer. I'm 23 now, but was 18 at the time, and am a girl. I used to live in a town that gets very hot during the summer, between 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit daily. I went to my local Walmart to do some light shopping and pick up a pair of flip-flops. As I was in the shoe aisle, I noticed an older guy, probably in his late 30s to early 40s, standing there as well. My town has a good amount of drug users, and he appeared to be one of them. When he saw me, he started to say really gross sexual things to me. I'm used to being catcalled and experience this thing a lot, so I just ignore him, pick out a pair of shoes and continue with my shopping. He follows me down a few more aisles and then stops following me. After I pay for my things, I leave out the exit of the shop towards the parking lot. The Walmart is part of a strip mall with other stores, so I start walking right towards the end of the strip mall to catch the bus back home. After walking 20 seconds, I notice the man standing next to the car in the parking lot, talking to someone in it. He sees me and breaks away from the car and begins to head in my direction. I continue walking, and he begins to walk parallel next to me in the road, about 10 feet away, still saying really gross things to me. At this point, it's more than just creepy comments in the store. He's following me outright, and noticed that I was approaching the entrance to a John's Incredible Pizza, which is a kids' pizza and play place here in California. So I run to the doors and make my way inside. I told the girl at the counter that there was a guy following me outside and asked if I could stay inside for a few minutes until he was gone. She let me, and also sent 2 male workers to walk all the way around the store to see if they could find him. They didn't. So I decided to stay about 10 more minutes before I left to go to the bus stop. When I got to the stop, there were 2 women there. When I told them what happened, they promised to stay with me and walk to keep me company. So to the creepy guy who followed me through the parking lot, let's not meet again. This situation was also in broad daylight, so I decided I needed a can of pepper spray in my purse. Ladies, protect yourselves. I'm currently a 24-year-old female, and all of this happened 3 years ago. I live in a very small town. Like if you sneezed while driving on the highway, you'd miss half of it. In this town, it's pretty much the picture of everyone knows everyone. Because of this, I've been walking around on my own since I was in middle school, and I've never felt unsafe. On this day, I had just been at my boyfriend's family's shop, uptown, which was about 4 blocks or so from my house. I'd been speaking with him and his mother, helping out a bit in the shop, and then headed home. My boyfriend and I didn't live together yet. I still resided with my grandmother and brother. When I was about a street away from my house, a car pulled up beside me, and it was a guy named Ben who I've known for a long time. He was a year younger than I, and his older brother was in my grade at school, so I've known him and considered him a friend since we were little. He had 2 girls in the car with him, one I knew called Carly, and one I didn't. Ben asked where I was going, so I said, going home. So then he offered to drive me. I'd like to pause and point out that he was driving in the opposite direction away from my house. His grandfather and uncle live across the street from me, and he knows exactly where I live, and has been to my house multiple times to help out with small chores like shoveling snow and trimming a hedge, so he definitely knew I was almost home. Ben would have had to drive all the way around the block to take me home, and I was literally 1 street away from it, and I could see my house from where I was standing, so I politely declined, and said it would only take me a few more minutes to walk there. He then offered again, but insisted, "Can I give you a ride?" It had changed to, "Just get in the car," and I started getting weird vibes, so I declined again, thanked him for the offer, and wished him a good afternoon, and started walking. He then put his car in reverse and backed down the street, following me and matching my pace. Now I hear him say something to the effect of, "Don't just walk off, get in the car now." I've gotten rides with friends before. I've even ridden with Ben in a car that mutual friends were driving, because it was 100 degrees out and I had to walk to the square, and they passed by me as I was leaving the house. I do have a car and a license, but I'm pretty much broke and don't like to use gas if I can help it. So I walk a lot. Not to mention the fact that outside 1 or 2 locations, anywhere I need to go in the town is less than a 30-minute walk from my house. As I've said, very small town. I've accepted rides from friends before when it was pouring with rain or freezing cold, or if I had armfuls of groceries from the dollar store down the road from me. And once, for a week or 2, I rode with friends to school or co-workers to work because my car got totaled in a collision. Thankfully, everyone was fine in that. But on this day, it was a breezy and beautiful summer's day. I had no groceries and with not a cloud in the sky and my front door just ahead of me. But yet Ben was insisting and even demanding that I enter his car. At this point, Carly, who was in the back seat, was looking a little uncomfortable, and she looked like she was just going to try and get him to keep driving. The girl in the front, who I didn't know, was laughing and looking back on it, she may or may not have been high. I kept telling Ben that I was fine, and I was less than 10 yards from my front door, but he kept insisting, swearing at me, and telling me to get in the car or else. Luckily, a truck drove up, and Ben had to drive away because he had pulled into the wrong side to talk to me and was blocking the road. I ran the rest of the way home, and messaged my boyfriend everything that just happened from the safety of my bedroom. I didn't tell my grandma just then because she was napping, and I didn't want to wake her. Now, remember how I'd said I'd been at their shop about 4 blocks away? Well, my boyfriend was at my front door in about 5. He, like me, does not drive. He ran the entire way, wanting to make sure I was okay since, apparently, Ben had some issues in the past that I was not aware of. I met him at our front door and told him again everything that happened. I kid you not. We stood on my front lawn talking. I looked up the street I had just walked down and saw the car, Ben's car, pull up the 4-way stop there facing my street. And he just sat there for a few minutes. No blinkers on, no indication of moving. Then without signaling, he made a turn and vanished. Just a few minutes later, he appeared on the opposite end of my street, cruising very slowly, right past the empty lot next to my house. I was really freaking out, and then he showed up on the turnoff directly across the street from my front lawn and pulled up in front of me and my boyfriend. My boyfriend put himself between us as Ben rolled down his window and started saying he wanted to speak to me. The 2 girls were still with him, and now Carly looked really uncomfortable, but I wasn't saying anything. The other one was still grinning and laughing. My boyfriend was yelling at Ben to back off and leave me alone. Ben was yelling that he wasn't doing anything to me, and I had moved from freaked out to full-on scared. My boyfriend was demanding why he was circling the house, and Ben claimed he hadn't been doing that. Now my grandma called me back inside because her phone was ringing, and it woke her up. I go in and Carly is calling from inside the car. For some reason, instead of rolling down the window and talking to me, she called my home phone to explain to me that Ben was just picking up a friend who lived down the turnoff, and he wasn't circling our place. She said this, even though there was no one new in the car with them. So who were they picking up? I hung up, went back outside where my boyfriend and Ben were still having a shouting match, and eventually it culminated with Ben driving off. My boyfriend stuck around for a while to keep an eye out, but then needed to return to the shop to help his mother, as he'd run out and left her running it alone, only stopping long enough to say I needed help. He told me to call if Ben returned, and to ring the cops if necessary. Literally not 20 minutes after my boyfriend left, Ben pulled up in front of my house again, but this time the girls were gone. It was just him. He knocked at my door and I was genuinely terrified that I hid where he couldn't see me through the door, and my grandma answered. Now, my grandma raised 6 kids, including me and my brother. She worked retail, had been a single mother, and dealt with all manner of assholes, and does not take crap from anyone. And this is a literal tank when it comes to kids. So the instant she pulled the door open, she started screaming at him that if he didn't leave me the hell alone, she was going to call the police, as well as tell everyone in his family, as again we lived across from his granddad and uncle, what he was doing to me. He started spouting some excuse about how it was only a joke and he was just kidding around. He also kept insisting he wanted to talk to me and asked her to let me outside to talk. I was still hiding at this point in tears and shaking, and my grandma tore into him, telling him she didn't care if it was just a joke. He was stalking me, had threatened me, and harassed me by continuing to come to our home, and if he didn't get off our property in the next 60 seconds, the police would be arriving at his place very shortly. He then left, but for the next month or more, I was terrified of running into him alone again. If I went anywhere, I had someone come with me. and I didn't walk anywhere for weeks. I found out later that he had shown up at my boyfriend's mum's shop later that day, but my boyfriend and his brother had yelled him out. I'm not sure if maybe he thought I'd be there, or if he was just trying to convince them it was just a joke. About a year after all this happened, I ran into Ben while I was out, and he gave me an apology for scaring me, insisting he'd only been joking and I overreacted. I, being a bit of a pushover, decided to accept his apology, but I let him know that he had severely damaged my trust in him, and that he should never expect me to go or be anywhere alone with him again. He accepted that, and now, years later, I've seen him a few different times in public places, and exchanged pleasantries with him before making an exit, and mostly when my boyfriend was present. Things got somewhat resolved between them as well, but my boyfriend made sure to let him know if he ever did something like that again, he would regret it. And to this day, I've never gone or stayed anywhere with Ben where it was just him and me. Anytime I run into him on a quiet street, I say a quick hello and keep walking. This has made me very wary. I'll always be looking over my shoulder to make sure he isn't there. So to the friend who followed me home, let's not meet again. This happened a few years ago. My boyfriend and I had gone to Walmart and had been there for about 20 minutes at this point. We're in the bras section, and he tells me he has to go to the restroom. He leaves to the very front of the store while I'm in the centermost part. I'm standing at the bras and notice a large man walking towards me. Keep in mind, I'm a very paranoid person, and I'm always looking over my shoulder for multiple reasons. This guy stops right next to me, like if I lifted my elbow I could have touched his. I tell myself not to be a paranoid freak and resume looking at bras. Well, in the time it took me to look at the first guy, a different guy ended up on my other side and is looking at the bras too. Both men are on the phone, and I audibly gasp, but then immediately assumed they were on the phone with their women. Dumb, I know, but I tried not to scare myself. I decided to give up on bras for the moment and went to look at underwear instead. As I walked to the underwear aisle, a different man walked into the same aisle looking right at me. He stopped at one end and I stopped in the middle, and I called myself a fool for profiling these men and continued browsing. Then, as I was about to leave the aisle from the opposite side of the third man, the first man walks into that aisle from the side I was attempting to exit from. He was still on the phone but wasn't speaking. It was just up to his ear. Then I decided I wasn't being paranoid and started mentally begging my boyfriend to come back. I was too scared to walk past either of them and couldn't find the third guy, so I stayed until my boyfriend was in view again. Then I practically ran out the aisle and told my boyfriend what happened. He was pissed and wanted to see the men, but I just wanted to leave and to never see them again. When I was about 25 or so, my boyfriend and I decided to live apart. We were broken up for a very short while, and when we got back together we just kept separate places for a long time. As a note, I highly recommend all women live on their own for at least a year before they decide to cohabitate. I learnt a lot of life lessons during this time. My apartment was pretty amazing for a young single woman who was supporting herself. Although it was a one-bedroom, it boasted a separate office and dining room as well. Each room was a separate room with its own door. Except for the bathroom, the rooms didn't branch off a hallway. Instead, you went through each room separately to get through the place, and my bedroom was at the end. When you entered the apartment, the rooms went as follows. Living room to the office. You either turned right to a small hallway that led to the bedroom, bathroom branched off here, or you went straight ahead into the kitchen, then turned right to go into the dining room, then bedroom. The best feature of my apartment was accessible from the kitchen. The back door opened up onto a large covered balcony. The place was cheap, $450 a month in the year 2000, and all utilities paid. I even got free basic cable. The landlords were a rare find, elderly and sweet, and took care of any issues that came up. With one exception, my back door, the one leading to the balcony. It had no lock on it. Now, it's actually mostly my fault that I didn't make it a priority to get it fixed. I really thought that I was pretty safe because the balcony had no steps leading down or anything, and the wall was sheer. The balcony was high up enough that a standard ladder wouldn't reach it, so if someone tried to enter, they'd have to be extremely determined. Now, my decorating tastes are a little boho, and I'm fond of stuff that sparkles and shines. My apartment reflected my tastes and was decorated with fairies and crystals and butterflies. I had sun catchers and wind chimes in the appropriate locations. A friend gave me a couple of sets of miniature fairy chimes as a gift, and as they were very small, I decided to hang them on each of my doors. I enjoyed the slight twinkling sound they made when the doors opened or closed. Thank God for my eclectic tastes. I'm sitting in the office playing some flash time wasters of a game on my computer when I hear the chimes on my balcony door. I assume I had failed to shut it completely and the wind had blown it open. So I jump up to close it again, and I come face to face with a skinny, shirtless, sweaty ginger dude with jailhouse tattoos all over his chest. He's obviously surprised to see me, and I'm scared but try not to show it. You hear all these stories of people getting severely beaten or even killed when interrupting a robbery. I'm surprised he didn't just knock me over the head with something and run. Luckily he didn't. "What the hell are you doing?" I say. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm here to do some contracting work on your apartment." "How did you get in?" "Is some dude here?" "Who?" "I work for some dude, and he told me I'd have to climb the porch. He said the back door would be unlocked." I look out. There's no ladder, rope, or anything to climb on. I'm thinking, who is this guy, Batman? I have no idea who some dude is, and no, there's no work scheduled for this apartment. Also, in case you haven't noticed, I gesture towards the balcony. This isn't a porch. As the ginger dude is mumbling again about how he was hired by some guy to work, I realize that he's not so steady on his feet and is also slurring his words a bit. Great. This guy is under the influence of something, and through his stupid, senseless mumbling, I finally just resort to screaming, "Get out!" over and over. He says he feels really bad about scaring me, and before I realize what's happening, he grips me in a smelly, sweaty hug. He goes out the door, and the second he's gone, I have a full-blown panic attack. I'm bent over, head between my knees, wondering faintly if I should call the police or someone when I hear a terrific crash from my living room area. As it turns out, the ginger dude had gone into another part of my building and climbed into the attic area. As he was poking around, he lost his footing. There are beams you have to step on to get across the attic, and had fallen through my ceiling. I stand in my living room and am looking at a pair of scrawny legs poking through my splendid ceiling. He pulls himself up in a high-pitched smart-ass kind of voice and calls out, "Excuse me!" This infuriates me, and being the smart, modern woman, I storm into the attic and confront him. He once again gives me this story about being hired to do work on the place, and I tell him he's full of shit. He holds his hands up in an appeasing manner and says, Okay, what do you want from me? I tell him what I want for him to do is go downstairs, sit on the curb, and wait for the police, because I'm calling them right now, and they're taking him to jail. When the police show up, he is sitting obediently on the curb, patiently awaiting his ride to the pokey. Turns out his girlfriend at the time was in the apartment next to me, and he thought he was breaking into her place. My landlord's got a new lock on that door in short order. But wait, folks, there's more. Eventually, I got called to testify in court against him, along with a number of other people whose homes he apparently invaded. I get approached by a Brittany in a teensy denim skirt, and this is the conversation that followed. Are you the girl whose apartment the ginger boy broke into? Yeah. I'm his ex. Oh. No, not your neighbor. I'm his baby mama. Yeah, she said that. Are you gonna press charges? Yes, I am. Well, I don't blame you. But I wanted to let you know that he has a 2-year-old and a baby on the way, so you might want to think about that. Why? He didn't think about it before he did what he did. He has kids to support? I just think you should think about it, that's all. Look, I appreciate your situation, but my situation? I got no situation. He never gave me nothing. He hasn't seen his children in months. Maybe you should think about that. As for me, I'll be pressing charges. Turns out, Ginger Boy had broken into multiple homes and actually attacked an elderly woman who happened to be home when he broke in. He got 5 years for breaking into my place. I'm not sure what else he got for the others. Maybe it was 5 years total, I really can't remember. The courthouse took a couple of hours, but I got a paid day from work because I was subpoenaed. I have no idea why he didn't attack me, like he did the elderly lady, but I feel extremely lucky, because usually stories like this don't end so well. It did, however, give me one hell of a story to share. Last summer, I was working in Florida. I'm from Canada, but got to work at Walt Disney at a summer job. It was one of the most fun experiences I'd ever had, and I spent most of the summer on Disney property. One day though, the Adventure Zone graphic novel was released, and I had to get my hands on that. The only place I could get a copy was Barnes & Noble's, and the only free way I could get there was taking a bus to Walmart and then walking for about an hour. It was my day off, and I figured I might as well. Getting to Barnes & Noble was fine, but on the way back to the Walmart bus stop I had to walk past the parking lot. As I was passing the parking lot, someone beeped their horn at me. I stopped to look over because I thought it might be one of my co-workers, as few of them had cars. A guy in a suit stepped out of the car and waved at me. He said hello, and I, being startled, tried to figure out if I knew him or not. It was a bad idea. He immediately commented on my appearance and asked where I was working. He also said that he could give me a drive back to wherever I was going. I was freaked out, but the impulse to not be rude was dangerously strong, and I told him I wasn't interested and enjoyed taking the bus. He laughed and said that if I was interested, he could drive me home and get me a job at the hotel where he worked. For some reason, despite being pretty upset at this point, I kept speaking to him, and I told him the truth, that I couldn't work anywhere other than the company that sponsored my visa, Disney. He laughed a second time and told me the visa wouldn't be a problem. It was at that point that my survival instinct finally overrode my friendliness, and I hurriedly told him, "No thanks, I'm moving back to Canada. Goodbye," before booking it into the Walmart. This sucked. In the Walmart, I grabbed a few items and went to cash out. Still freaked out, I tried to talk to the employee who was cashing me, so that maybe she could contact someone about the man. For all I knew, this could be some sort of dodgy scheme, but I was unsure. Unfortunately, that wasn't much better. She was extremely dismissive. She made a couple of jokes, saying things like, "Well, he was cute at least. Didn't you want to ride home?" and laughing at me. I didn't cry, but I could feel my face turning red because I felt patronized over something that had really upset me. Thankfully, the woman behind me in line asked if I was okay and tried to tell the clerk that I was obviously not trying to joke around, but she didn't seem to care much. Once I got outside, I was thankful that there were other Disney cast members at the bus stop. I didn't speak to any of them, but at least I didn't feel as vulnerable. So Walmart parking lot guy, I hope the next time I go to Florida we don't meet. And Walmart clerk, I don't particularly feel like meeting you again either. The creepiest moment of my life so far may be tame compared to some of the stuff that you've heard before, but it was still scary nonetheless. Right. Every Saturday, me and a few friends get together to watch UFC. We live in England, so this usually means staying up until the early hours of the morning, followed by a painfully tiring walk home after it's finished. I live on the other side of town to my friends, so whenever we watch it at one of their houses, I have to walk a good 6 to 7 miles to get home, as I can't afford a car. This was never a problem though, because I don't mind walking as long as I've got a bit of music to keep me company. And I was still a naive 17-year-old who thought everyone in my area was friendly and harmless. Needless to say, I was proven wrong. September last year we were watching UFC. I remember it was John Jones versus Rampage because I lost a substantial amount of money on a bet when Rampage got completely dominated. The event went on until around 3 a.m, at which point we all parted ways and set off home. I had made this walk countless times and considered my chosen route perfectly safe, although looking back, it was probably the worst route I could have taken. I basically followed the main road for a mile, and this led to some back alley which led to a 5-mile home straight, consisting of a high road to my right and Forest Park to my left. In the day, the park was really inviting, as it was just swings, slides, and a climbing frame, completely surrounded by a wall of trees. It was like something straight out of Center Parks. However, at night time, with the lack of light, it's a stereotypical, almost Scooby-Doo-like creepy place. I had made it to the home straight without interruption, and everything was going as normal. I remember I was listening to Hit the Road Jack by Ray Charles at the time. I was about 2 miles down the road and just coming up to the dreaded playground when I felt a car coming up behind me with its high beams on. It wasn't uncommon for cars to pass me on my walks home. Minicabs frequently passed me, but it was unusual for their lights to be that bright. I thought nothing of it at first, but the lights stayed on me for way longer than they should have. All I was thinking was, how has this car not overtaken me yet? I took out my headphones and I heard the engine running really slowly, like when you pull a car out a drive. It was at this point I realized the car was literally right behind me. The driver must have seen me notice him because he sped up, so he was going at the exact same as me. Being naive, I thought he probably just wanted directions or something, so I stopped to see what he wanted. As I stopped, so did he. I took out my other headphone and said something along the lines of, "Hey, what's up?" He didn't say anything but just stared at me. He looked like he was in his mid-40s and not of English descent. My best guess was that he was Polish, due to his greyish-white hair, big build, and scruffy appearance. No offense to Polish people, by the way. That's just how a bunch of Polish people that I personally know look like in my area. His blank stare kind of freaked me out, so I just stuck my headphones back and started walking fast down the road. This was far from the end, however, as he again matched my speed, staring at me the whole time, not once looking at the road. As soon as he caught my eye, he gestured me with the "come hither" motion, which accompanied his now grinning face that really freaked me out. I was genuinely panicking at this point and started weighing up my limited options. I could try to run home, but this would mean running in a straight line for 4 miles, which I probably couldn't do for a start, and he would be able to drive alongside me the whole way. So that was a no. I could attempt the freak-out method and try to act crazy to scare him off, but I had already shown signs of fear, so doing this would probably result in a physical confrontation. I can take care of myself just fine in a fair fight, but this guy could have any assortment of weaponry, so that option was a definite no. In the end, I had to go for my third and final option of dart into the forest and hide until he drives away. As much as I didn't want to do it, I jumped over the small ditch between the path and the forest and proceeded to hide in a big jumble of bushes 20 meters in. At this point, my heart was in my throat, and I just sat there staring at the road, waiting for the lights from the cars to disappear. I must have sat there for what felt like an eternity, but it was in fact just a few minutes. But the lights didn't go away. All I could do was plead that the car drove off, and after several more minutes of the lights just staying there, I realized I had to plan another way of getting home, or at least away, and I figured the only way was to make the rest of the way through the forest. But I couldn't move. I was genuinely paralyzed with fear. It took me a minute to compose myself, and then I gradually started shuffling forwards. I didn't care how long it took, I just had to get home. I edged forwards gradually and eventually reached the clearing where the park was. I didn't want to be out in the open, so I was trying to think of the best way to get around the park. It was only then I noticed a black silhouette sitting on the swing with its back to me. It could only be him. He must have gotten out of the car to look for me and was just waiting on a swing. Tears were streaming down my face because I was sure that it was him. Once again, I found myself paralyzed with fear. He hadn't seen me, and I don't think he had heard me either. But the sickening feeling was in my stomach, and he just sat there rocking back and forth. I took a deep breath, and then sprinted as fast as I could back the way I came, back through the forest, and came out on the edge of the road where the home straight had started. I say sprinted, but I felt like one of those dreams where your legs don't work properly, and they just shake and wobble uncontrollably. From there, I ran all the way back to my friend's house. I don't remember much about the journey at all. It felt like 1 second I was in the forest, and the next, I was banging on his door and shaking uncontrollably. He let me in, and his parents called the police, who arrived about an hour or so later. I went to the station to make a report and give a description of the guy, but they never took it any further because my description didn't match anyone of known danger in the area. When my parents found out, they insisted that it be taken further, but the police seemed to think that nothing illegal actually happened, which is fair enough. I guess there's no way of knowing what his true intentions were, but as far as I'm concerned, I thought it was near the end for me that night. It goes without saying that I never walked home at that time of night again, and now I'm a hell of a lot more paranoid when it comes to strangers. As soon as I was sure my laptop was dead, I ran to school and frantically tried to locate the quickest, most economical replacement I would be able to afford in order to meet my medical school's IT requirement and resume my studies. I located a Walmart about 25 minutes away, in the distant burbs of a city I just made my home, where I could find a brand name laptop for $250 and pick it up that same evening. Fearing for my academic future, I forked over the dough and jumped in my car. The 10-mile drive from the highway was all used car lots, thrift stores, and double wides. I arrived at my destination with a fairly nuanced opinion on why this pickup location had met my price criteria. I came in the front door of the Walmart in my usual kit, black jeans, tank top, shades, and several different women who called me baby directed me to the electronics section, where another woman informed baby that baby's laptop order could not be filled as a consequence of demand. I took off my shades. I hadn't come this far to leave empty-handed. I'd like to look at the laptops you have in stock, I told her. She waved her hand, and up stepped the guy. I think the reason I let him stand so close to me was the fact that his arms were half as long as the average person's arms, and it momentarily shifted my perspective. I learnt last week that that's called phocomelia. I really do learn something new every day. We walked over to the laptop aisle so close that I kept kind of tripping over him. Then he turned and looked me straight in the eyes like a fortune teller or seer and pronounced, "Your pupils are really huge." "I take a medication that makes my pupils really huge for ADHD, I replied. "I know, they're always like that. They're really big. Are you not used to being outside during the day?" I didn't know what to do with that one. I figured it was like a foul ball. Didn't follow it. "I used to be in law enforcement," the guy says, smiling widely. "What do you do?" Was that supposed to make me feel better? I was trying to imagine him handcuffing someone with his tiny arms. It seemed difficult. "I'm a med student," I said. He nodded and said something about laptops. I also said something about laptops. "So, are you old enough to drink?" he asked me. I could smell his breath. Generally, dead things smell better. "Yes." "How old are you?" 26. "Do you like horses? Motorcycles?" "I'm not actually into any of those things." "I used to do both of those things." "Do you have a boyfriend?" He's leaning closer now. I'm so close to the laptop. I need that laptop. "Yeah, I've been with a guy for 5 years." "Well, congratulations." He says it like we're at a bar mitzvah or something. He leans into the laptop cage and pulls out my desired laptop. "You're a real stand-up gal for not dumping him, you know. I was with a girl for a long time. We lived together and everything, but it didn't work out." "Oh," I said, reaching for the laptop. He smiles and I realize he has A, pupils that are bigger than mine, and B, the kind of teeth that give Appalachia a bad name. Long story short, she went to prison. "Oh, wow. I'm sorry about that." "Are you sure you're old enough to drink?" he asks. This is awkward, so I try to make conversation. "What's the difference between a Walmart and a super Walmart?" "Well, they're basically the same thing except we sell drugs." Eyebrows moved. At this point, I broke his unnerving stare and hightailed it for the cash wrap, where the woman who called me baby was waiting to serve me. As I checked out, the guy hung just over my shoulder and informed me that he had a pet snapping turtle. "You've got to see her. She's a beaut." "Don't they snap?" I had to try to involve the cash wrap lady in the situation, and I looked at her. "Oh, they snap, baby," she said. "But his turtle is beautiful. She's a precious thing." "She acts just like a kitty," the guy assured me. "She's brown and yellow, real big. You sure you don't want to come see her? She's in my truck." "Oh, thanks, but I gotta go," I exclaimed, before running for the front of the store. "Hey, good luck in nursing school," he shouts after me. "Please, weirdo, let's not meet again." I live in an extremely quiet neighborhood, one that's considered safer than most of the ones surrounding it. One Sunday morning I woke up abruptly early and decided it'd be nice to go for a walk. I live in a very foggy place, so of course there was a lot of mist swirling around. Still, it seemed like a fairly ordinary morning. I ended up walking for about 15 minutes when I noticed that there was literally no one else out on the streets, including cars driving by. My neighborhood is very quiet, and it was super early in the morning, so I thought nothing of it. I'm not really one for walks, as it was very out of character for me to even go for one in the first place, so I opted to turn around and head back home. After a few minutes of walking, I heard the light crackling of gravel behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a disgruntled old man on a bright red bike pedaling in the fog around 20 feet behind me. Thinking nothing of it, I turned forward again and kept walking, assuming that his biking would be faster than my walking and he would pass me. Another minute passed and I turned around in confusion, wondering why the hell he still hadn't overtaken me. My heart skipped a beat, as I realized he was now just 10 feet away, biking at the same speed I was walking. Slightly creeped out now, I decided to just pull over to a bench on the sidewalk and take out my phone to let him pass me by. My heart was beating super fast as he slowly pulled in front of me, but to my relief, he continued to pass, or so I thought. As I got up from the bench, I realized he had simply pulled over at another bench, 10 feet down the sidewalk in front of me, and stationed his bike there. I was hoping he'd go into the nearby building, but he simply stood there staring out into space. Now I was panicking. I sat back down and began texting my friend to tell her what was happening, in the hopes that he'd get back on his bike and pedal away. When I looked back up, he was now 5 feet away from me, still staring off into space. I put my phone up to my ear to pretend like I was speaking to someone, and then I got up from the bench and fast walked past him, back towards my apartment. I half expected him to grab me, but fortunately he let me pass. At this point, I was walking as fast as possible without breaking into a jog, with my phone in my ear. I glanced back again, sure that it was all in my head and he'd be sitting on the bench, but instead found that he had gotten back onto his bike and began to pursue me. Fully creeped out now, I gave up on walking and jogged through an abandoned parking lot that would lead me to a row of restaurants. The man, completely expressionless, kept following me, a bit faster now to match my pace. The parking lot was surrounded by two massive warehouse buildings covering it, more or less from the street view. I was sure this was where he was going, to suddenly speed up and brutally finish me. I made my way to the other end of the parking lot and to the street corner to the restaurants visible just across the way. The "no walking" sign was lit up, and for some reason I decided to obey it, even though there were no cars around. At this point, the man was seriously pedaling towards me, so I finally gave in and dashed across to the restaurants. None of them were open, but one had staff inside. Panting, I stood outside the restaurant, making sure I was within their sight. The man on the bike stood across the street, where I had just been moments before, staring at me. I honestly waited 10 minutes for him to give up and leave, but he didn't move the entire time. Finally, for a split second, he looked away, and I dashed around the corner of the building out of sight. I sprinted all the way back, making sure to take any twists and turns so he wouldn't be able to find me, just by pedaling quickly. I know it may not seem that creepy to some, and that I could have handled the situation better, but I was so shaken in the moment that all of my actions were the first thing to pop into my mind. About a month after that incident, I exited my apartment, which is at the bottom of an extremely steep hill, to head to my Uber. I'd pretty much forgotten about what had happened, but I just happened to look up to the top of the hill, and the same old man was standing at the top, this time without his bike, staring down at me. I got into my Uber and drove away. It's been about a week since then and I haven't seen him since, but I constantly feel like he's gonna pop out and maybe unlock my apartment door and do who knows what. This happened a week or two ago, and I'm still a little shaken by it. That night, I had gotten out of work somewhere between 11:30 and midnight, and needed to take a quick run to Walmart before heading home. Being that it was late, I drove through the lot for a bit, trying to find a close spot, and noticed an older truck following my car. I didn't think much of it, just figured they were doing the same. I finally found my spot, and noticed they parked 2 spots away from me. Again, I just figured they wanted a closer spot too. Without really thinking, I glanced over at the truck, and there were 2 men. I noticed the older one, 50 to 60-ish. The driver was calling me and trying to get my attention. For reference, I'm a 19-year-old female, and I quickly dipped into the store. He was calling after me the entire time. Immediately, warning bells were blaring in my head. I tried to get through the aisle fairly quickly to lose him, but he found me multiple times and kept telling me how pretty I was and asking things from how old I was to if I was in a relationship or if I was interested in older men, just being inappropriate in general. I'm normally a fairly shy person, and I get a little awkward in situations like this. I tried to keep myself and tell him I wasn't interested and to leave me alone to no avail. He ended up following me through the checkout line, just staring at me. After checking out, I finally asked one of the male employees to escort me to my car, which he did, and the man finally left me alone. The entire time in the store, the other guy he was with disappeared, and that set me on edge even more. I still can't help but wonder if he would have tried something if I went outside alone. So creepy man at Walmart, let's not meet again.